Good morning. Welcome you all. My name is Diego Stacy. I am the ambassador of Ecuador to Canada. At the outset, I would like to greet, first of all, the Dean and the members of the GRULA Canada, as well our panelists and participants. I'm really very pleased to present the third and last session of the seminar, The Economic of the COVID-19 in Latin America, the impact of the economic of the COVID-19 in Latin America and Canada, the way forward. We will have the opportunity to listen firsthand from the representatives of Mexico to WTO, Ambassador Ángel Villalobos Rodriguez, and the chief economist of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Canada, Franz Paquet. Firstly, a global analysis of the current situation and the effects of COVID-19, focusing in the inhibitors and obstacles of international trade that could prevent a rapid recovery, jeopardize the needed unified response, and hinder access to markets. And secondly, we will listen to the evolution of the Canadian trade with Latin America as one of our most important partners. I would like to also to recall that the previous two sessions of the seminar dealt with the Canadian perspectives and its relations with Latin America. Also an assessment of a CLAC about the economic impact in Latin America, the business opportunities with Canada, tourism promotion, boosting key sectors of the economy through public-private partnership, and finally, the digital economy. Allow me to thank this time in particular the Embassy of Mexico for the whole initiative. Latin America and the Caribbean will face the worst recession in recent decades as a direct consequence of COVID-19 pandemic. According to the projections, the Latin American countries will suffer in a particular acute way the economic impact of the crisis. Therefore, the well-functioning of international trade is vital to prevent the increase of unemployment, poverty, and inequality rates in the region. The IMF forecasts that output in the region will shrink by 9.4% in 2020, more than 3% projected for emerging economies as a whole. The coronavirus crisis will affect the region through 5 main channels: reduced international trade, lower commodity prices, increased risk and deterioration of global financial conditions, reduced demand for tourism services, and reduced remittances. As OECD stated, no one can ignore that in an unprecedented global health crisis, international cooperation is substantial to keep trade flowing. In the midst of a significant uncertainty, through boosting confidence in trade and global markets, by improving transparency about trade-related policy actions and intentions. Second, keeping supply chain flowing, especially for essentials such as health supplies and food. Third, avoiding making things worse through unnecessary export restrictions and other trade barriers. In front of these challenges, trade policies actions should be pursued aiming an inclusive and sustainable recovery, as what trade rules should be adapted or developed to guide collaborative positions to future global crises. I'm confident that today's session will be not only an excellent opportunity, but a timely occasion to highlight the importance to strengthen and promote international trade as a tool for recovery and growth, especially due to the pandemic, and the need to work together with Canada as a close partner to securing an environment free of protectionism, prohibitions and restrictions, under the adherence of the principles of solidarity, inclusiveness, and international cooperation. I'm very honored to introduce this session our first two panelists. Ambassador Ángel Villalobos Rodriguez, currently permanent representative of Mexico to the WTO, has a degree in economy from Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey. He was Undersecretary of International Trade Negotiations and General Director of Foreign Investments of the Ministry of Economy. He has extensive experience in international trade and trade negotiations, including the negotiations of various Mexico EFTAs, among which are the Mexico-Japan Economic Association Agreement, the Mexico-Uruguay EFTA, and the expansion of bilateral agreements with Argentina and Brazil in the framework of the Latin American Integration Association, ALADI. He participated in the first years of negotiations of the Doha round. And finally, he was also Consul General of Mexico in Vancouver, Canada. So we are honored also by the presence of Marie-France Paquet, Chief Economist of Global Affairs Canada. Marie-France Paquet took on the role of Chief Economist and Director General, Trade Analysis Bureau at Global Affairs Canada in September 2017. As Chief Economist, she leads a team of analysts in reporting and advising on international trade, investment, and economic issues. The team undertakes trade and economic research and analysis such as economic and gender impact of trade agreements and the impact of foreign direct investments on the economy. Madame Paquet has previously worked in other government departments and in academia. She's a PhD in econometrics and taught economics in the University of Ottawa. He was also the Director of Operations, Economic and Regional Development Policy Secretariat at the Privy Council, providing policy advice to the Prime Minister. Our first two panelists will have 20 minutes each to make their presentations, followed by 20 minutes questions and answers from the participants and public in general. We expect to end this part of the session at around 10 o'clock. So please, if you all can mute your computer, and I'm glad to pass the word to our first panelist, Ambassador Villalobos.
Muchas gracias, Embajador Stacy, for conducting this panel, and thank you very much to GRULA Canada for this invitation, and my regards to Ambassador Camacho, who is a distinguished diplomat from Mexico, and also my special thanks to Jackie Marquez. Jackie and I worked for several years overseeing foreign investment in Mexico, and she's a brilliant lawyer and a very hardworking professional. I'm sure the Embassy of Canada is fortunate to have her as a commercial attaché. And let me say that also I want to thank the general public who has joined this conversation, and thank you for their interest. And although to spend some time of a Friday summer morning on these issues may be some type of masochism, but anyway, they are welcome. And I'm very glad to share this panel with Marie-France, the Chief Economist from Foreign Affairs Canada. And as I see, you have organized a very complete series of virtual conversations. So by now, all of you may be experts on issues related to COVID-19 and the economic impact, fiscal and monetary policy, and all types of support programs, and to individual and business, and so on. So today I will touch upon obstacles to trade, but before that, I will see some things about how the economy in general is going in the world, and particularly in Latin America. I'll see something about trade, and then I'll go directly to obstacles to trade or inhibitors, and what is being done about it. But before going to such details, I must confess that when I was quite younger, part of my job was to do economic forecast. So I used to work on scenarios for large corporation, and normally we use a lot of economics, econometrics, and so on. And I thought that I was very well trained to devise scenarios that we will develop a basic scenario, a optimist scenario, and the worst case scenario. And so I thought that I was trained for that, and we will do the numbers, and then the companies will take that as an input, and they will run their financial planning, and so they will have corner the future. They will know what will happen to them somehow. But I must confess that the numbers I am seeing now is something completely out of my imagination. Completely, even though I did some very worst case scenarios back then, what I am seeing now is completely out of any range. Let me say that as a discharge to my inability to ever imagine what we are going through, is that this late January, I went to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and there were the fat cats of the corporations. They were the wise guys, the visionaries, and so on. And nobody ever mentioned that in a few weeks we will be all hiding from a virus, and that the world was about to come to a complete standstill. So it has been an exercise of humbleness, or inability to really know the future. I just wanted to say that before going to show you some charts and graphs. It's a collection of information that I took from the most recent reports from WTO, IMF, and some from the World Bank. I'm going to introduce a presentation, and I'll go quickly over the charts. I'm just going to make some remarks. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, sí, está muy, yes, it's okay, yes. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Please, you can go ahead.
Let me see why it's not advancing.
No, no, it's
yes, I just will show quickly the size of the economic plunge that we are seeing now. As I tell you, I have never imagined the numbers that we're going to see. And it was mentioned by Ambassador Stacy, the numbers for Latin America are really bleak, and bleaker than they were in April. And I'm going to show some indirect numbers about what is happening in some indicators about airlines or containers or manufacturing orders. And also, it's very important to keep in mind that the pandemic is still on. It is nothing that happened. We are in the middle of that, so it will have important consequences in the economic future. This is the chart of the GDP for the world. I'm just going to underline that I have the numbers that the OECD is projecting for this year and the coming year. And I will say the OECD is the one that has the more pessimistic numbers. They say that if we may have a second wave, and if we have a second wave of the virus, the economy will go down above 7%, and it will come back only for 5%. But I want you to compare the size of the recession compared to what happened in 2009. It's about 2.5 times. So we are really going into a decline of import, employment, and so on, as we have never seen in many decades. And this comes from the IMF report, the one that it was tabled in June. I was to underscore that it shows a decline of the world about 5%, but which is more dramatic is that big economies like the United States is expected to fall 8%, which is a huge number for the United States. The European Union is about 8% too. I think countries like Spain, which is above 12%. So those are numbers that one could never imagine in any ways. And when in a few weeks, the United States unemployed about 22 million people is impressive by any standard. And this is the numbers that Ambassador Stacy were mentioning. Now the expectation is that Latin America is going to contract by 9.4%. And in April, it was supposed to follow only 4.2%. So things got worse and in a very dramatic way. And economy, like the Mexican economy is supposed to fall 10.5%, Peru almost 14%. All of those are big numbers as we have never seen before. And it's important to mention that for our economies, foreign direct investment is very important. It's the main source of external resources. And the expectation, according to UNCTAD, is that it's going to follow 40% in the current year, and it's going to follow even 5% more in the coming year. So in 2021, we will be 60% below the flows that were happening in 2019. This is a very important drop that is going to hit our economies. And for Latin America, the expectation is that not going to fall 40%, it's going to fall 50%. And this is an indirect indicator. It shows daily global commercial flights, just to show how the measures taken to implement the social distancing when the supply and demand shock, in order to minimize the human cost of the pandemic, when they ordered the people to not to go to work, and they ordered to shut down the companies and so on. It had a very immediate impact, and we can see how daily global commercial travel fell 75% quickly, and we see some rebound, but it's far away. I don't know if you saw the images when they showed all the planes parked in the airports. It was eerie that you will see all of them parked as the world came to a complete standstill. And then the same I can say for global container traffic. It just stopped and went down like 40% in few weeks. So you will see empty containers for several weeks. And then the same for new export orders, according to purchase manager indexes, just dropped from in few weeks, just stopped like 50-60%. So this just indicate how quickly the economic activity was suspended. And this is going to have important consequences in terms of imports and exports. And things are very uncertain. And as long as the pandemic is not completely tamed or controlled, we will see outbreaks, and the economy may start working, but then we will have to stop. Like, I am from a city in Mexico called Monterrey, and in Monterrey they did almost everything well, but anyhow last week they went back to a lockdown. So the immediate future is very uncertain, and we can see that this is not up to date because this is about 5th of June. But since then we have seen an uptrend in Latin America, in the United States, and in Africa. So we still have many places in the world when the pandemic still is a hot spot. So and this might have implications for the death or the fall of the economy, and also for the recovery. And now I'm going to refer to trade. I want to underline that even before the COVID-19, international trade was kind of stalled. Even it didn't grow in 2019. It fell like 3%. I'm going to show a chart. And I'm going to show something impressive, how international trade in Mexico, so it had a sudden pause. You will see the chart, and I'm going to indicate why the world trade was sort of limping even before COVID-19. Here, this is the index of global trade for goods, and the blue line is the real line supposed to be, and as you can see, almost at the end of the line, It was already flat before COVID-19. And in April, WTO made some forecasts, and the red one is the pessimistic scenario, and the green one is the optimistic. So the range was it will fall 13% or it will fall 32% into 2020. And the recent numbers indicate that we might get closer to the optimistic trend. But anyway, it's an impressive fall that we didn't even have in 2009. And this reflects much the decision by the governments to stop economic activity in order to stop the spread of the virus. This is the case of Mexico. This is the figures for May. From April to May, you see how export and import just stopped and fell like more than 50%. So they decided to shut down the companies that make cars, the companies that make auto parts, and the United States didn't demand cars. So it was a complete stop of activity, and that's reflected completely in exports and imports. And for Mexico, imports plus exports represents about 75% of the GDP. So for Mexico, it's very important, the external sector. And now, just to show that even before COVID-19, there were some obstacles to trade. The commercial war between China and the United States with big tariffs against each other were applied already to about more than 10% of the G20 trade. But when I said G20 trade, that's about 80% of the global trade. So those taxes imposed by United States and China to each other somehow were hindering the growth of international trade already before COVID-19. And this chart shows the same, but it says every year to how many millions of dollars new taxes or tariffs were applied. So it's, the other one represented the accumulative, and this is just year by year. So somehow both countries were throwing some sand on the system. And now what happened when COVID-19 came? So we will find that we have a mixed bag. We have many countries that impose especially export restrictions, and particular in medical goods. But then we saw a reaction. Many countries did place many facilitating measures, and then came an important political commitment to try to contain that. And I will mention something about the way forward. I just want to stress here, like there is a G20 report from the WTO, and that shows the restriction for imposed by those economies. In the last report that covers from October to May, but especially they underline what happened since the pandemic started. 93 actions were taken, but 65 of them were to facilitate trade, and only 28 were to impose restriction on trade, and mainly were bans, prohibition to export, or to limit exports, which is somehow is good news. The problem is there. So there are some restrictions on export, which are supposed to be prohibited by GATT, but also some exceptions apply, and which are being used by some countries. And in the chart below, you can see that the medical goods sectors was one of the areas where most of the restrictions were imposed. And you remember that there was an issue about the ventilators and the mask and so on. So, and what happened is that when the spike of the demand came, there was a lot of uncertainty. So many countries that were producing ventilators or masks and so on decided not to export to other countries because they were afraid of not having enough material for them. So it was a natural reaction, but affected many other countries. And even in countries with very close coordination like Switzerland and Germany, we can find some actions that block export from Germany to Switzerland and vice versa, because they didn't know how many ventilators they would need, pharmaceutical products, and so on. So, and let me say that medical goods is not a big number in international trade, but it's very concentrated. The production, the imports and the exports are concentrated in few countries. Let me say, like China. China produces 50% of the mask and the protective instruments for the medical profession. So that concentration became a problem because the dependency on few producers raised a significant problem. And some other information came that most of the export prohibitions were lasting only for 3 months. And this shows the import facilitating measures that were taken, and said it quickly. Many economies, most of them net importers of food and also of medical goods, played many actions in order to facilitate trade. And here is just to show that as beginning the second part of April or in February, we saw many political statements from G20, APEC, and many communiques from WTO members in order to avoid or contain that economies place restriction to trade. Because the idea was that if you put too many restrictions on trade, you will exacerbate the fall of the economy and you will complicate the recovery of the economy. So it was important to have the political muscle behind the containment of what was going on. And when we talk about the way forward, we learned that there is a lot of room to discuss the WTO export restrictions, because the idea that you can place export restrictions as long as they are transparent, as they are proportional and temporary. But that's not very well defined. So people just apply them, and then in 6 months they report that they put a restriction. And also, in the way forward, it will be very important to analyze. Many support programs were placed, and they may have implication on trade. So a lot of analysis will be needed on that. And it's important to have a shortened reporting time. Instead of reporting 6 months after you place the restrictive measure, it will be important to have a shorter period in order to notify that your partners, international partners, will know about it. And some dialogue that is going to be important in the way forward is how to be best prepared for COVID-20 or 21 or whatever. We saw some very important coordination between IMF, the financial institutions, because they learned from the problems in 29. But there are many other topics between the OMS, the WTO, the World Customs Organization, that requires quite more coordinations. And something very important is we must learn the right lessons. What I mean by that, because some countries are reading that we must do a lot of reshoring, nearshoring, diversifying, and other countries are referring that we need more open markets, more cooperation, more coordination, which are very opposite views of the world. And I guess Latin America faced some of the problems because they couldn't import ventilators and so on. Or some countries in Latin America imposed some restriction exports of food. So Latin America must be part of all the discussion that I just mentioned above, and has to be an important player. But okay, Latin America now has its hands full with the deep economic crisis that is coming, that is going to send many people without a job, bigger numbers of poverty. So it's going to take a lot of effort to get through this economic situation. Thank you very much.
If you can please move the presentation, please, Ambassador. Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador Villalobos. It has been a very interesting presentation, and as you said before, we have two sessions regarding the impact, the economic impact of the COVID to Latin America and Canada, and really we are convinced that we are facing the worst, as you say, the worst case scenario out of any range, and that urgent measures should be taken to curb this development that affects our economies and the life of our peoples. And certainly also Latin America is in the middle of this pandemic. Probably is now one of the hot points in the world. And it's sad to see that, as you said, that the decline of the economic indicators in exports, investments, are declined and have never seen something like that in decades. And most of the international organizations have a coincidence in this issue. Also, it's important to mention that the economic activity is suspending most of the dynamics and the real productivity of our countries. And that also weakens the world trade. And we are facing this global pessimistic trade scenario. You have mentioned also the obstacles, the restrictions, the prohibitions and the banning that, of course, it should be consistent to the WTO rules. And so it's important to see that there are countries that are not in the line to enhance or to put restrictions or any kind of barriers in international trade, and that there is an important effort to coordinate and to adopt the sound measures. Yes, there should be adopted measures within the WTO in order to bring some more rules. How should we deal, especially with the essential products, and especially with medical supplies? Having said that, well, I will give the floor to Mary Frances Paquet to continue with our presentation. And as you know, she will speak about the evolution of the trade between Latin America and Canada. So please, Madame Mary Frances Paquet, you have the floor.
Buenos días, muchísimas gracias, embajador Stacy. Muchísimas gracias también por la oportunidad de presentar hoy de mañana, y gracias al embajador Villalobos por su presentación. Yo creo que lo mío será complementario, no un sustituto, pero un complemento. A ver, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see if we can do that. Yeah, can you see that?
Yes, it's okay. Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So once again, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to present this morning. Let me start by two disclaimers. One is an apology. So some of the graphs I don't have enough room to present all the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So my apologies for those countries if they don't show up on the slides. And also I tend to use Latin America and the Caribbean as a substitute. So again, an apology for that in the language. And a thank you note, of course, for putting the presentation together to some of my team members, Jeff Bennett and Tuan in particular. So if it looks good, it's thanks to them. If there's any mistakes, it's because I probably fiddle with some of the graphs. Okay, so I decided this morning to take a bit of a longer view, if I can put it like that, in terms of the evolution of trade and investment between Canada and Latin America and the Caribbean. Because, of course, focusing only on COVID, I think would be it's kind of hard. As Ambassador Villalobos said, if you've been doing forecasting early on in your career and you look at forecasting nowadays, it's a different kind of a modern art. And when you had a bad scenario of -3%, now it's like -30%. So it's quite different. So by taking a longer term view, I think it pays a better tribute to the evolution of the relationship between Canada and Latin America. So in terms of the evolution of trade over, since 2000, so what you can see, of course, is that the imports from the region has been growing at a very good rate at just under 6% over the period, and exports have been growing just under 5%. Okay, so that is quite interesting to see. Some of the countries with whom we have, longer standing the relationship, and I'm thinking, of course, Mexico, given the trade agreements, we've seen exports grow and take a bigger share, a bigger importance even in the trading relationship. So in terms of where we stand today, so if you look at nowadays, so of course Mexico is at the top both of the exports and imports with Canada, and we've got Brazil just trailing behind, Colombia, Chile, Peru, and like I said, a lot of categories, let's say, are increasing at really a good rate. So there's progress that's being made, and that's very encouraging in terms of a longer relationship. We do have a lot of trade agreements already with the region, as you know, and I think it pays tribute again to the importance of the region for Canada. In terms of categories, of course, and you'll see here some important, both on the exports and import side, I'm looking at automotive products here. And what we will see, of course, is when you look at the impacts of COVID, this is certainly a sector that is taking a big hit in terms of trade worldwide, actually, but definitely with Canada, with the US, European countries as well. Okay, so unfortunately, but I think it's one of the sectors that will eventually bounce back a bit faster than others. Okay. In terms of investment, so the region is playing an increasingly important role in Canadian foreign investment. So that's, again, another good news if you take a longer term view of the situation. So this is the evolution of the stock of investment since 2000. Okay, so the red line is the Canadian investment in Latin America and the Caribbean. Okay, so it went from 19% in 2000 to 22% in 2018. And then the FDI, which is the foreign direct investment coming to Canada from the region. So again, an increase there, but from 1.2% in 2000 to 5.7%. So it looks like a smaller line, of course, when you compare to the red one, but there's a good increase in position. Top investment destinations, so from Canadian investors to Latin America, we've got Barbados, Bermuda, Mexico, of course, and the source of FDI. So we've got, again, Bermuda, Brazil is an important source, Cayman Island, British Island, and Mexico again. But once we take into account, this is an important point, once you take into account the ultimate investing country, which is the real origin of the investment, not where it transit through, then Brazil becomes has a bigger role, if you will, in terms of investment from Latin America. So we go from 16 billion to 30 billion, 94% of which would be from Brazil. Okay, so it's a huge difference when you look at not only where the money transit from, but what it is originating from. Okay, so that's also very interesting to look at. So in Canada in 2018, I think the Minister Ng has mentioned it at your the first part of your event in late June, that Canada had launched an export diversification strategy, and I thought it would be interesting to look at it nowadays. So initially in 2018, the goal was, so the goal is still the same, but it's going to be harder to get there, I think. The goal was to reach an increase of 50% of overseas exports by 2025. So 2025 seems like tomorrow morning to me. It's coming fast. 50% seems like a big increase, yes. And overseas market, of course, what we mean by that is outside the US, okay? So we consider Mexico as overseas market for Canada in this, okay? So it's just to set a target, right? Because there's nothing like having a goal or a deadline for an exam to study. So now we have a goal and we need to put our efforts in terms of trade promotion and trade commissioner service to help our companies reach that goal, okay? So the trajectory you see there, the dotted lines, were just based on forecasts back in 2018. And as you can well imagine, so the small point at the top, I don't know if you can see my cursor, this little square here would be the target for 2025, okay? So nowadays, of course, with what's happening in 2020, it's not going to be impossible, but it's going to be, I think, a bit more difficult, okay? So if we look at this portion here, and we see that in 2019, we had slower growth in terms of exports, and therefore we missed the target by just a bit, okay? So nothing to be worried about. If it had been for the COVID, maybe we would have been able to catch up and reach the target eventually. But of course, COVID happened, and 2020 will be a very difficult year worldwide, and it's going to be the same for Canada, right? So the square you have here at the bottom is just Q1. If you compare Q1 in every year, and you see that 2020, of course, is a bit lower. It's 4.4% lower than Q1 in 2019. So if you look just at that, you say, okay, maybe we can catch up. It's not so dire situation. But of course, as you know, Q2 will prove to be even more difficult. So if you were to compare Q2 2020 with Q2 2019, it's going to be abysmal. And I think reaching the target for this year, of course, will be challenging. The question remains, what will happen in 2021 and 2022? Will the economy bounce back? And for us, of course, we depend on our trading partner, because just as Ambassador Villalobos said, for Mexico, the trade is a very important component of GDP. It's the same thing for Canada. Our trade intensity is around 65%. So we depend on trade the same way. Okay, so we go around and we sign trade agreements. We've done quite well in the past few years. So we have 14 FTAs with 51 countries altogether, and more or less represent 2/3 of the world GDP. So when we talk to potential investors, of course, we say, well, if you set up shop in Canada, it gives you access to this huge network of FTAs of countries, and you can take advantage of preferential agreements if you don't already have them in your own country. So that's always a selling point. And we keep on negotiating, of course, okay? And that will be very important, as yes, COVID will eventually be behind us, hopefully sooner rather than later. And then we'll get back on. A lot of attention everywhere is being put on trade. And as Ambassador Villalobos explains, a lot of the measures in terms of export restriction, import, to help out with imports of particular goods and whatnot. So a lot of attention will be put there, and it will remain crucial for Canada to keep on negotiating those trade agreements and making sure we're doing the right trade promotion, talking to our own companies to invest abroad and do business abroad, export and all of that, and the same way to attract more investment into the country. Okay, so the past few years in terms of attracting investment to Canada, just a parenthesis, they've been, the size of the pie of world investment is shrinking. Okay, it's coming down, but the share of what's coming to Canada is actually kind of going up. So we see an increase in flows. So it is a difficult situation right now, but we seem to be able to still attract quite a lot of investment, and that is, of course, good news. Okay, so if you look, it's true. The U.S. is and remains our main export market for Canada, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a very important and key player for the Canadian economy. But if you look, this is just to an interesting way of looking at the evolution of trade with the U.S. If you compare in 1981, so before, let's say, the Canada-U.S. FTA, 65% of export was going to the U.S. We signed a deal. We signed a deal so that businesses can take advantage of it. So we hope that, of course, more exports will be going there and take advantage of those preferential tariffs. That's the case, increase in export to the US. Same thing when we signed NAFTA with Mexico and implemented in 94, we go up to 76% to the US, and we reach a peak of 81% in 2000. At that rate, you kind of think, well, maybe it's a bit too much of all your eggs in the same basket, and it'd be nice eventually to diversify. But initially, when you sign a trade agreement, it's precisely with that objective in mind, right? Is to make sure that those business relationships can flourish through the trade agreement. And nowadays, so 2019, we're about at 71% of exports. So we've been very active at signing FTAs in the past 10, 15 years. And now we see the diversification kind of happening slowly, little by little, but we see it. Okay. So, and of course, CUSMA, as we call it in Canada, so the agreement between Mexico, the United States, and Canada came into force on July 1st last week. So we'll see, of course, more trade eventually kind of flowing between the three countries. So it was certainly, a big relief to see that being implemented as an economist, because it's been a long journey. It's been a difficult journey in terms of negotiations, but we're there and it's in force. So that's really good news. I just want to take 1 minute to talk to you about an example. So we go around, we sign those FTAs, and we count on that, and we tell the government, you stand, the companies and the country stands to benefit from those FTAs, and we do that ex ante. When we start negotiating, we do that normally once we negotiated a text, but what after? Okay, so once you have quite a few years of trade under an FTA, then it's time to look at the impact of the FTA. And that is exactly what we've done with the Canada-Chile Free Trade Agreement. So it's something that's available on our website. But I wanted to highlight a few things, okay? So with 15 years of data, you can look at it in a much better way. And what we look at, economists like to look at the changes in existing trade pattern, or the intensive trade margin, or the new trade opportunities, or the extensive margin. Okay, so what we've seen is that bilateral flows between the two countries, they grew 12% faster than if we had just a baseline scenario, no FTA in place. Okay, that's a huge difference. Okay, Canada's export to Chile grew by 5.4%, whereas 1.7% for the rest of Latin America. So it's interesting. It's not causality, but it's a correlation. Okay. And then what we see, of course, is that Chile became the third most important destination for Canadian exports then. And after that, then we lost a bit of ground in Chile in terms of Canada's market share in the Chilean market, okay? And that is just normal. Of course, you signed a trade agreement, you want your business to take advantage of it, and they do. That's what we've seen, okay? With that existing trade relationship increasing, with new trading relationship being developed. But as Chile was very active signing other trade agreements, of course, Canada was losing a tidbit of their preferential advantage in the Chilean market, okay? And so that's just normal. But what we've seen overall is that the majority of the trade gains came from new trade, okay? So 90% of the net increase in the value of Canadian export to Chile was new trading opportunities. And that's a very important point that I like to make, because it's something ex ante, we know it. So when you run your model, you try to estimate the potential gain of an FTA, you tell people, yes, and by the way, there will be more, but you cannot quantify it, because in your mathematical model, if there's no trading relationship for a particular good, the model cannot decide suddenly that it will increase by 5%. It's just not mathematically possible. So, but this proves that, of course, there's new trading opportunities and that businesses take advantage of them. And that's what we like to showcase. So Trade diversification will be important for Canada. Okay, we'll continue to monitor export restrictions, and hopefully those will be lifted as the situation evolves for the better. Hopefully in the coming months and coming years, and hopefully things won't stay on and drag on. That's certainly a concern of some economies, right? And Ambassador Villalobos talked about notifying your trading partners and all of that. So there's going to be a lot of attention there, and it will be the same for Canada. So the question remains, okay, so what about the impact of COVID on Canadian trade and in Latin America? Okay, Canadian trade between the two countries. So what we've done is we've used the same type of model we used to assess the impact of trade agreements, but we use it in a different way. We put a huge shock on GDP that we are seeing right now. We put a sectoral impacts, right? Accommodation, recreation, tourism, manufacturing. So we're all seeing a huge impact on those sectors. And we're seeing, because of the shutdown in the economies, we're seeing like labor shortages, like labor shrinks completely. And we're seeing public health measures as well. Okay, so we put those shocks in the model, and then we looked at the evolution of trade. And of course, it's a bit scary. So that's the shock. And we looked at for 2020 and 2021, we don't go beyond. It's too it's too risky business, let's say, to try to do forecasting beyond that. Okay. So those macroeconomic shocks are coming from Oxford Economics. Okay, so we're using them as the input in the model. That's the shock we have. Okay, and what you see is this. Okay, so that's your baseline. So trade was coming down. I think Ambassador Villalobos mentioned it in a few slides. So overall, world trade was coming down. It was the same for Canada. Okay, and then here, what you see is in 2020, we see a decrease in exports of 20% and a bounce back of about 19% overall. Okay, so yes, a very bad 2020 year to be expected, and hopefully, fingers crossed, most of the sectors can bounce back, but they won't all bounce back in the same fashion, of course. Okay, and given the time, I won't go to all the following slides. I'll just go quickly, but you'll have them for further review if you need them. So I'll just take an example. So for the US, of course, so we have a decrease in exports to the US of 20% and a bounce back of about 17%. So we're still a bit short if nothing else happens, of course. Okay. You've got countries, let's say France will be pretty much even after if it realizes, right, like that. But for some countries like Mexico, so a shock of 19%, a bounce back of about 12. We're still a bit short, okay? And some of the sectors, of course, as I said initially, motor vehicles and parts is a big hit in 2020, but we expect a good bounce back, but not a complete one. So we won't catch up completely, okay? So there's been delays, of course, in all, shipment of different parts, and as the economies are reopening, but the different sequencing, it creates quite some difficulties, okay? So we see other sectors that will bounce back, let's say business services. So we had a 20% shock, and we think that we can catch up and then some more potentially, okay? But most of the sectors, we won't catch up completely, okay? So overall, we see, some sectors like metals, for example, 31% shock, but just a small bounce back compared to the shock in 2020, okay? So some sectors will be able to fare better than others, okay? And then I'll look at the impact for Latin American trade, okay, between Canada and Latin America. So what we see is that, of course, we can have a huge impact here in terms of total trade of about 15% for 2020 and some recovery for 2021. Okay, but overall, we're not back on business as usual, not at all. Okay. So in terms of imports from Latin America, so what we see as I said before, so motor vehicle and parts is a sector that would not completely bounce back, and other metals as well. And those two sectors alone represent 81% of the import losses from Latin America and the Caribbean. Okay, so those sectors are, of course, at risk, if you will, something to follow closely in the coming months to see how the evolution goes. Okay. In terms of export to Latin America, there's a shock, yes, but it's more widely distributed across sector. It's not only in two sectors. Okay, and this is what you see here in terms of what goes into the model. I'll just go over that quickly. Well, but to make the point, maybe if Mexico, let's say here, the projection for real GDP shortage was 5%. Of course, if you think it's going to be more or less, then it would have an impact on the result. But these are impacts, projection on GDP coming from Oxford Economics that we've used. Okay. So what we see in terms of Canada exports, for example, to Mexico, as I said, so 20%, almost 19% decrease, a bounce back of 12%. Okay. Peru, we see a decrease of 14% here and a bounce back of 19%. Well, that's a bit more interesting. So it really depends on the economy. Colombia, almost, 1 for 1. Okay. Maybe a tidbit better. Argentina, not quite. Okay. Dominican Republic, yeah. Okay. Almost there. And Caribbean altogether, it's almost a flush, okay, in terms of Canada's exports. And on the import sides, it varies quite a bit as well, okay? So in terms of imports from Brazil, for example, we can see a shock of 24% and a bounce back of 14%, okay? So overall, that's you see the impact, and it's not, you're not flush, okay? So there's a negative impact eventually. And the public health measures in the model are there, even though the economies are reopening, okay? Because as you put less workers on an assembly chain because of, physical distancing and all of that, it adds on costs for businesses. And in the model, it translates into additional trading costs, okay? That's how we take into account those impact, okay? And then you have the sectors. So overall, okay, I would just end it by saying that, the impact of COVID, of course, is dire, okay, on the trade impacts for Canada and for Latin America and for the world as a whole, right? But if you just look at this 2020, 2021, it just looks like a very pessimistic scenario. And by looking at the longer term history, then you hope that eventually within a few years you can bounce back to what we had before and then some more. Okay, so for us, for Canada, diversification strategy is needed now more than ever. Okay, so we'll continue, of course, on a path of negotiating more trade agreements, making sure that we work with the WTO to make some needed improvements, let's say, in the system, and making sure that all the countries can abide by the rules and benefit from trade in general. Okay, so the COVID impacts for trade on Canada and Latin America. So some sectors are expected to bounce back, but most of them would not be pre-COVID levels. So we'll see some impacts for a few years to come. And I'll end on a note, of course, that none of that modeling, which is a big disclaimer actually, none of that modeling takes into account the informal sectors in Latin America. Okay, so it's not something that we have in our trade model. And unfortunately, it does play a role because it can, it can go both ways, but it's not taken into account here. And I will stop there because I think my time is up. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mary France. It has been certainly an outstanding presentation, and I will certainly distribute this information through our colleagues and the participants who are willing to have it. I think it's a very good perspective, a very good forecast, and certainly more and more we listen that even though that the situation has been worrisome until 2020, of course, the year of the COVID-19, that things will be improving starting next year. Certainly, Canada is one of the champions in speaking about foreign trade, and is a very important partner of Latin America. That's why, hopefully, Mary Frances, in the future, we could have also a wider picture of all the Latin American countries, the 19 countries that are part of this region, and so we can also make a better analysis what will happen with each of our countries. Even though I think it's very interesting, and I think it's a thing to be promoted, the FTA that you have with 8 Latin American countries. and especially the one that you mentioned with Chile. That really has been a very important tool to improve trade, as you say, new trade between both countries. And another point that I want to highlight is diversification. That's a principle, that's an objective that is on the top priority of most of our countries. We know the problems that brings us geopolitics. For instance, now the problem we have between the USA and especially China. So there is an urgent need for diversification and also to sell more non-traditional products. We are very happy, I think, until it's incredible, until the first semester of this year, our exports, and I'm sure most of the countries do, especially from the foodstuff and from the agricultural sectors, are increasing. And there's no barriers for those products. And so we think that will not represent really a decrease in our balance of trade with Canada. So having said that, and sorry that I cannot continue, as you mentioned so many interesting indicators, but as Ambassador Villalobos, I think, has to leave. Now, I would like to ask now to the participants, and especially also to the colleagues and the members of the GRULEX and the ones who are participating. And in this case also, I want to greet especially Cheryl Urban, our Director of South America, that is with us, and also the Vice Minister, Luz Maria de la Mora, that's Secretary of Economy of Mexico, that also joined our session today. So I will ask you please to raise your hand. If you can go to participants and raise your hand, that will be the best way to put some questions to our two panelists. In principle, I would participate. Just 1 second. Yes, I have here two questions. One is from Juan Jose, Ambassador of Mexico, Juan Jose Gomez Camacho. Please, Ambassador, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, embajador. Ángel, gusto en verte, Marifans. Ambas espléndidas, both splendid presentations. I have a question to you, Ángel, if I may. I'm very curious about the politics of WTO now. There you have, it's a normally polarized membership. You have the group of more free traders like ourselves and most of Latin American countries, and then you have the other group of more protectionists, if you will. As a result of COVID-19 context, the restrictions to trade that you mentioned, the instinct to protect yourself on certain products, etc. Where is the debate now? What is going on? Because I honestly don't believe that there is you hear a lot of consensus politically, statements, declarations, but in the room is different because interests remain the same and original views and ideology remains the same. So what is happening inside? How countries are dividing themselves in order to decide how to approach the future of trade? Maybe many are deciding that this is a great opportunity to pursue more protectionist policies, or the opposite. So that's what I would like to hear. And thank you so much for your presentation and accepting our invitation, please, as well.
Embajador Camacho, thank you
Por favor.
Embajador Camacho, thank you very much. And about your question, you were in Geneva for several years, so you know that place. And when the economies are in the downturn, the vested interests become more entrenched. So we don't perceive a more favorable environment to free trade from the countries that are always opposed to that. And you know what countries I am referring to? They are reclaiming more policy space because the crisis and so on. So things are not going to get easier in Geneva with this downfall in the economy. So things are going to get tough in the coming months. And as you know, we are in the middle of a new selection of the new DG. So things are more complicated than normal, I shall say.
Okay.
Very good to see you. And I'm sorry, but I really have to leave, but anytime you can contact me, and it will be my pleasure to get in touch with you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Villalobos. And I will now give the word to Mr. Mehrad Hariri, that has put a question. Please, Mr. Hariri.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for exceptional presentations. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from the two presentations. My question is for everyone, but in particular, in terms of the question for Canada, for Marie-France, if you will. So Minister of Finance presented some data of the snapshot of the economy in which the deficit was much larger than everyone else was expecting, around maybe 100 billion more than the projection was around $250 billion deficit, but now we see around $350 billion. I'm just wondering, this new perspective of the economy, it may change your projections of the recovery and the numbers that you have shown in terms of the export and import in global context, and of course in Latin America. My second question is for everyone, if people would like to discuss this issue as a result of COVID-19, what would be the trend of the global trade as a follow-up to Ambassador's question? The protectionism versus globalization, are we expecting to see fall back of the globalization discourse and a free trade agreement among the country, something that was stepped back as for the past couple of years? Thank you.
Please, so Marie-France, if you would like to take the word.
Yes, I'll take the first question. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. So I think we were all, most of economists in Canada were in front of the screen to read and watch Minister Morneau present his statement yesterday, which again was presented as not a usual economic and fiscal update, because it's, again, the point about, forecasting revenues and even spending is quite difficult these days. But to your point about the deficit being much larger than what had been anticipated, of course, I think we saw it coming. It's as you know, it's a combination of revenues coming down, right, from businesses in particular, so income tax from business income tax, and then spending increasingly quite a bit. There's been, I think, in April and May, we had announcements like sometimes on a few times a week with big measures in place. So of course that adds up quite quickly. So you're right. So it went from an expected deficit of around 250 billion to now like more closer to 349 or something like that. Now, the point I think is important to see here. So yes, it would have been much nicer not to have it, but I think we need to look at it in the positive way, which is Canada had the room to maneuver fiscally. We had the option of putting all those measures in place to help out the businesses, to help out workers, people, families with children, seniors, and all of that. And that's what the government has decided to do, is to move in aggressively early on with measures to try to, I wouldn't say avoid the crisis, because we can't really avoid it, but at least tamper a bit the negative impacts on the economy, right? So that comes at a cost, and it's a larger deficit than expected, of course, right? But in terms of debt to GDP, if you think back, just look back at 2018, 2019, I think Canada was about 28% debt to GDP. So we were the best placed country around the world for that in the G7, G20, maybe not around the world, but certainly in those circles. And I kept telling people this is an important number to have in mind. Every time I travel to Canadian embassies abroad, I would say to the trade commissioners in place, don't forget this. And this is important because it means when the downturn will come, because it will come, will have the room to maneuver through the crisis. Now, the downturn was quite unexpected. It was not a typical recession, right? It's a worldwide crisis, and the government has had the room to maneuver, and I think that's the good part. So the debt to GDP ratio will go up quite a bit, and it will look like a huge spike because that's what it is. There's no way to hide, right? Now, what's been highlighted by the Minister Morneau yesterday as well, the Minister of Finance, is the fact that because of what's happening around the world and on the financial markets and the different measures taken by the central bank, the Bank of Canada, the cost of borrowing from the Canadian government is going down. So that's going to help us. It's not going to make the deficit go away, of course, right? But it's going to help us in terms of the service of, what was it we need to pay in terms of interest on that deficit and on that debt. So we're kind of, I'm tempted to say lucky in that way, but it's all the measures being put in place by the government, by the central bank, by what's going on around the world in financial markets, and we're not in such a bad shape. And I think the tone in the minister's message yesterday also seemed to indicate that should there be another wave, Canada's ready. So that's another hint that, we cross our fingers, we hope that the worst is behind us, but, we're seeing what's happening elsewhere, and we're not done with this virus, right? And we don't have a vaccine just yet in sight. So the government indicated that they seem to be ready to move a bit more, and don't quote me on that. That's just my reading of what the minister has said, right? But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Marie-France. First of all, I didn't see here, but I would like to greet Michael Grant, the Assistant Vice Minister for the Americas, that is attending this Zoom. And now, please, I will give the floor immediately to the Ambassador of Chile.
Muchas gracias, Diego. Thank you so much, Marie-France. C'est très intéressante votre présentation. Merci beaucoup. Especially because you use our free trade agreement as an example on how the free trade agreements works. And more than a question, I would like to make a short comment. For us, for Chile also, that free trade agreement, it's sort of a template, it's sort of the example how you have to manage your bilateral relations, economic bilateral relations. For us, it's the first free trade agreement with the developed country. It has been very successful. We just renewed, as you mentioned. And what is more important is that we are absolutely convinced that to open the economies, it's very important. And we will continue on that path. And that's why we invite Canada, and we're inviting through this Zoom activity today to join us on the Digital Economic Partnership Agreement that we just signed with New Zealand and Singapore, because we know that that will be sort of a new way of making businesses. So thank you very much, Marie-France. For us, it's very motivating to see Canada using those kind of examples. And I want to finish with one good news concerning how trade is moving, international trade. It's true that in Chile we use, I don't know how do you say that in English, we use a sort of una expresión que dice una golondrina no hace verano. But what happened in June, this month, for first time during this year, the exports in Chile grew by 3%. So those are very good news. That mean that some markets, international markets, are starting to reopen, and let's hope that all our countries will benefit from that possibility. Thank you so much once again, Diego, Sofia, Mexico, and to our colleagues for organizing this activity.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Well, I think we don't have much time, but maybe the last question that we received from the public to Marie-France. I don't know if this is your area, but here's how do you see the contribution of the Ottawa Group to provide leadership, critical thinking, and analysis, as well as ideas and proposals on potential actions that the broader WTO members could take? And this second is, are digital technologies an important player in transforming global commerce after COVID-19? So please.
So very quickly, so on the Ottawa group, you're right. It's normally I would leave that to our negotiating team, but I will just say I think Canada is in a good place to play a positive role into transforming the WTO, and I think one of the best way to show this is because you want to be very pragmatic in what you want to propose, right? If you try to transform completely WTO and it's restarted a new thing, it will take you years and years and years. I think there's a recognition that certain things need to change a bit faster and focus on those areas where countries can agree and move that forward. So I think it's positive leadership, and I think Canada is certainly pleased to be at that table. And the second point was about digital economy, digital transformation. Of course, it is an important sector in Canada as well, and I think we see that because if you look at some of the forecasts I had per sectors, and business services, for example, is able to bounce back a bit faster than other sectors of the economy. And I think if companies have and continue to transform digitally, because some have had but no choice during this crisis to do that very quickly, right? They had to adopt some transformation like overnight instead of taking a few months to implement a new change. So, I mean, some say let's not waste a good crisis. So might as well take the bull by the horn and do it. And if that trend continues, of course, it's going to be very favorable for Canadian business and for any business around the world, actually, right? Because as you're more digitally enabled, then the barriers or the distance in some cases for some services, the distance doesn't really matter, right? It's a lot easier to kind of ship a file across the world than it is to ship a container, right? It's a lot faster, certainly. And, when you have no cargo shipment moving around, you can still send it over the internet. So, I mean, it's certainly a transformation for Canada. I don't have numbers right here, right now, but we've seen it, right, in many companies. And for us, small and medium-sized enterprises, so we want to see a lot of that transformation happening there, and hopefully that will benefit, and the benefits will continue, will go way beyond COVID, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-France. And now, we shall continue with our next panelist. So I'm glad to introduce Mr. Corey McPhee. He's the Vice President, Corporate Affairs, Communications and Sustainability with Bell Base Metal Line of Business. He was born in Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. Mr. McPhee joined the former Inco Limited in the Public Affairs Department in 1989 and has remained with the company in positions of increasing responsibility since October 2006. After studying science at Laurentian University and journalism at Cambrian College, he worked in daily newspapers for 5 years as a reporter, columnist, and editor. Corey moved to a corporate office in Toronto as Director of Corporate Affairs in May 2007. He was named Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Communications in July of 2009 and has sustainability added to his accountabilities in September 2018. Corey is the co-chair of the Brazil-Canada Chamber of Commerce and Vice Chair of the Mining Association of Canada. He will be in charge of the presentation about his company, Bell Canada, the case of a successful Latin American business in Canada. So please, Mr. McPhee, if you are here, you have the word.
I am here. Thank you very much. And I have my video on. I hope you can see me.
Sorry, I see you now. Sorry. I see you
okay.
Now. Okay, please.
I want to thank everyone for this opportunity. We were approached by the Brazilian embassy and asked to present a bit of a study of how we've managed to operate with COVID-19. And they wanted a case of a company that has roots in both Latin America and roots in Canada. Before I start, I'll just acknowledge that I have two colleagues on the line as well. Luis Landero, who is a member of our senior executive base metals leadership team and our director of integrated business planning. And I'll be sharing the presentation duties with Luis because he's much smarter than I am. And I also have AJ Nichols, who is a colleague in the corporate affairs and communications field. So I will try to share my screen here because I do have some slides. Let's see if this works. I just have to find the right file. Oh, there it is. PowerPoint. Can you see this?
No, not yet. No. No. Unfortunately, we don't have your presentation, so.
You can't see it, eh?
No.
Okay, I'll go back to Zoom then.
Okay. Yeah.
You can see it?
Yes, now it's okay. Please, you can go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I'll start by introducing who we are. We are Vale, and we are an international miner. We have operations around the world, but our home is in Brazil. In Brazil, some of the largest iron ore operations in the world. We're a global leader in iron ore production. The business that I am part of, and Louise and AJ, is the base metals business. And so you can see here that the base metals business is international in its own right. It's a small in comparison to the iron ore business of Vale, but it's important. And what happened was in 2006, Vale acquired an iconic Canadian miner, Inco Limited, that had been in operation in Canada for more than a century. And that was Vale's venture out into the international realm. And now our base metals business has grown. We're on 5 continents. We have 16,000 employees. And you can see we have nickel and copper operations in Brazil and nickel and copper operations in Canada as well. And so a large footprint in both. We're in Canada, we're in 3 provinces. We're in Newfoundland and Labrador. We are in Ontario, and we are in Manitoba. And in Ontario, we have a large complex in Northern Ontario in Sudbury. We have our head office in Toronto for base metals. And we have a refinery in Port Colborne and a Mississauga-based research and business planning facility. In Newfoundland and Labrador, we have a mine at Voisey's Bay on the northeast coast of the country, and a new refinery, relatively new to us, in Long Harbour, Newfoundland. And in northern Manitoba, in Thompson, we've been operating a mine and mill operation there for 60-some years. Our operations in Brazil are Salobo, Sossego, Onça Puma. Onça Puma is a nickel operation, and Salobo and Sossego are both copper mines. The copper in Canada is basically a byproduct of the nickel that we mine because it's a polymetallic ore. So, like every other business, we were immediately forced to adapt to COVID-19, and of course, we followed it with the initial coverage of this virus coming out in China. And I had happened to be in Indonesia at the time, and when I came back, I went through Hong Kong, so I had to quarantine for 2 weeks. When I returned to work, we had the world's largest mining conference in Toronto that's called PDAC, the Prospectors Developers Association of Canada conference, with 20,000 people all gathered together, no social distancing at all. And there was a positive case that came out at that conference. So everybody who had been in attendance automatically was sent home. And it wasn't long before we sent all employees who were able to work from home. But in the provinces where we operate in Canada, we were declared an essential service. And the communities where we operate and the governments, I think, rely on our business being sustained. Not only do our metals, in terms of the base metals business, go into many of the medical devices that are necessary to fight these types of incidents, but the economic impact of our business is significant, because in many communities where we operate, we are the sole economic force, and our revenues over the last 10 years have contributed about 8% of Canada's mining sector GDP. So you can see here, the first challenge we faced was making employees feel safe. And so absenteeism at the beginning of the crisis was very, very high. And so we instituted all the safeguards that we could imagine, and continue to come up with safeguards as time went along. So we did thermal imaging of people to get their body temperature as they were coming in. Those that had elevated body temperatures were given more comprehensive testing for temperature. Every employee, before they went to work, had to fill out a self-assessment. What you can see on the right of the screen here is cage dividers that were actually created by our own employees. We work in an underground environment in Canada, where in some cases we're 8,000 feet under the earth, and they go down in what's called a cage. It's like an elevator, it's a conveyance, and people are in there shoulder to shoulder, so there's very little room for a 2-meter social distance. This was what you see in the right-hand picture was developed to actually provide a physical shield between people in the cage. So we actually were engaging our employees in sort of coming up with their ideas, their innovations, their ingenuity, and helping us deal with the coronavirus. And of course, cleaning, disinfecting, sanitizing, all of the things that you would see if you go to the local grocery store or any restaurant. No longer were people sitting beside each other in lunchrooms, cafeterias. It was all spaced out. People waiting for bus transportation, it was spaced out. All of the steps that we could take to make the workplace safe. At the end of the day, the absenteeism started to wane as people became more and more confident, but it required a huge communications effort on our part to make employees feel safe and to stay in contact with them. I mentioned that we have an operation in Voisey's Bay, which is in a very inhospitable area. It's beautiful, but it's cold. It's Northeast Labrador. The only communities in the vicinity of our operation are Indigenous communities, the Inuit population and the Innu population. We made the decision proactively to place Voisey's Bay on care and maintenance early on in the pandemic. And to my knowledge, we were the first mining company to voluntarily close an operation. And we did so because of our proximity to these communities. These communities have very little medical infrastructure, and they have a very bad history with previous pandemics. So seeing during things like the swine flu, they lost half their population, and they were very, very nervous. And so when you consider that we've successfully managed to comprise half our workforce of people from these communities, the prospect of people going into the workplace, staying for their 3-week shift, and then going back to these communities, they had the potential to introduce that virus. And that was something that we desperately wanted to avoid. And so we said that we were going to place it on care and maintenance for 4 weeks. We maintained salaries for not only our employees, but our contractors, who are largely Indigenous based. And then we reassessed. And I can tell you that just last week, we finally started to go back into production at Voisey's Bay. And we have put in a number of safeguards. There's a huge concern about people coming in from out of province, because currently Newfoundland and Labrador, I believe the entire province right now does not have a current case. And so anybody who has to come from out of province to Voisey's Bay, first of all, we eliminate that need if we don't need it. But for specialized skills, they will quarantine for 2 weeks prior to going to site. We've also struck an agreement with the private medical facility in St. John's, Newfoundland, and we're constructing a mobile testing facility that will be at the site. So anybody entering or exiting our site will be tested. And this will be the PCR test, the nasal swab that actually looks for the virus. Because at other of our operations, and including, as you'll hear from Luis in Brazil, we have been doing rapid response testing for some time now. It's a different type of test. It tests for the antibody. It's a blood test, and it's very quick, but it's more of a medical surveillance as opposed to a medical diagnosis. The picture here just goes to show, how we try to help our communities. And a day after we decided to place it on care and maintenance, we had a delivery of fresh fruits and vegetables that had been ordered previously. We offered these to our indigenous neighbors, the indigenous communities, and they gratefully accepted. And it's just another indication of the relationship that we enjoy. And the reason that we were able to proactively shut down and do so was because of the open and transparent dialogue that we enjoy with these communities, and we were fully aware of their concerns. I wanted to highlight the Vale Innovation Challenge because this was something that was a little bit unique. Of course, we did what a lot of companies did in terms of trying to supply assistance to our healthcare providers in terms of masks and medical facilities, anything that we could. But we also launched what we called the Innovation Challenge. And we're looking to tap the market for ideas that were almost ready for implementation, but perhaps needed a little push, needed a little funding. And we received almost 2,000 solutions from around the globe. It was concentrated in Canada, and it was concentrated in Brazil. And we had a number of categories for which we were looking for ideas to come forward, including an open category. This picture here with this young woman, there was a group of students, high school students from North Bay, which is in Northern Ontario, and they developed an ultraviolet cube that is used to sterilize equipment. And I believe she's holding her cell phone in there because it can sterilize anything. And they were one of our winners, and we actually helped them to produce and donate 50 of these sterilization units to healthcare providers across the province. With that, Luis, maybe I'll turn it over to you to talk about some of the efforts specific to Brazil and specific to our operations that we had to undertake to adjust.
Please, if you can take just no more than 5 minutes, because we are running out of time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And we have maybe questions afterwards, maybe.
Okay. Thanks, Corey. I'll be quick here. Thanks for the invitation. Just sharing with you some of the action that we took in Brazil. You can see in the pictures here, we donate 5 million of rapid tests to support the Brazilian government and our communities in Brazil. This was really highly appreciated for the community. Was the big donation just in the beginning of the crisis. The other picture on the top right, the right top, is about a hospital. We built 2 hospitals in the north of Brazil. Our operation in Brazil, we have operation in multiple states in Brazil, but the large operation is in Pará state. Is a state in the north of Brazil, and unfortunately, in the north of Brazil, we have lack of infrastructure, basic infrastructure. And this was something that we realized in the beginning of the crisis, that it was not just the company do our job, protect our employees, keep our workplace safe, but as well how we could support the community. And thinking on this, we built 2 hospitals there. You can see the pictures there. This helped a lot to support the public infrastructure system in Brazil. We use our supply chain in China to help the Brazilian government as well, and the states to buy the supplies. This was really important for the community. In the next slide, Corey, if you can move to the next one. Here is just perhaps to give you a sense about the market itself, because I think it was clear what we developed internally here. to support our employees and keep our workplace safe. But in the other hand, you can see here how the market is reacting. And I think you were discussing first about the economy, the economic impact. You can see here, for example, in these graphs, how the demand dropped a lot in the first quarter. This is the nickel high value. We support the infrastructure industry, the aerospace, automotive, oil and gas. And you can see that we had a significant drop of more than 55% drop in the first quarter. Yeah, this is bringing additional pressure to our business. We have started to see some recovery in the Asia market, but in Europe and in the North America market, the impact is still very significant yet. In the next slide, you can have a view about the copper. That is another very important product. This is the balance in the market, and we have seen a reduction, the copper deficit, a reduction, the industry, the demand really low. We have seen now recently some disruptions in the supply side as well. Some mining companies in some countries, in Chile, for example, some struggling to keep the production the same levels. We saw some disruption in other countries as well, and this is helping to create this unbalanced market. Now we are expecting to understand the future months. Lots of uncertainty yet, but the scenario is almost the same. Again, quick recovery in Asia. Seems that the recovery will be quicker in Asia, but Europe and North America really struggling to recover. Yeah, I think these were the slides that we brought today, and I think due to the time constraint, perhaps we could open for the questions now. Thanks for the opportunity again.
Okay, thank you very much, and for this very important presentation. Because I think we received very important information about the experience of the company doing business in Latin America. And it's impressive that Bell is a global metal leader with more than 16,000 employees in 5 continents. So Bell is one of the major players in the mining sector. And regarding Latin America, it's worth to say that Latin America has maybe the largest reserves of copper, lithium, silver, and gold, an extensive source of other minerals. So it's not a surprise that Latin America accounts for 30% of mining global exploration budget. Like this, I think, are many successful stories of Canadian companies and investors in Latin America, mainly in the infrastructure, energy, and financial sectors. Okay, now if there is any question, please, Romy, you are raising your hand. No, I thought you were raising your hand. No. Sorry. Hello? Romy, are you saying something? You have the word, Romy? No? Oh. Okay, then I think if there's no questions. Well, also I wanted to highlight because I was going to mention something about that Bell is supporting the local communities in Brazil. I think that's a characteristic of many Canadian companies that are working in our countries. The social corporative responsibility. I think that is the main, the key issue in the activities that are developing the Canadian companies in Latin America in general. Okay, having said that, if there's any question, so we will end.
It looked like there was one question from Canbrem 1261.
From?
Diego, good morning. This is Pedro Borio.
Pedro, sorry, I didn't see you.
But let me mention first that I think Cheryl has asked to present a question a long time ago, so perhaps we should defer to her first.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Please, Cheryl, I'm very sorry for that. You know, I'm handling my chat, the computer, and many chats, so it's really very difficult. But anyhow, very sorry for that, Cheryl. But I'm not an orthodox moderator, so please go ahead.
Oh, no problem at all. I completely understand. So I'm not sure if you wanted, my question was about the previous presentation. Did you still want me to ask that question?
Yes, if you want to ask Mary France. That's yes, Mary France is still there. So
okay, great.
If you don't mind, Mary France, please, Cheryl, go ahead with the question.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to say also, these are excellent presentations. I'm very pleased to be able to learn from them, and thank you for inviting me. This is really great. And it was just a quick question. It was a follow-on about the digital economy, and I was just wondering, and Mary France, I'm not sure if you have the answer. It's more of a, anyone else is also able to weigh in. During this entire pandemic, we've also had FTA negotiations underway in a number of places in the world. And I was just wondering about the impact of COVID on FTA negotiations, as well as whether we think that the lessons and the changes that come from the experience of going through COVID, including going digital, doing things in a different way, might have an impact on how the world and how Canada undertakes any kind of trade negotiation in the future, and if we think that that would have an impact on the future of trade.
Thank you, Cheryl. Please, Mary France.
Yes, thank you. Very small question, right? No, it's an important one. I think, you know, honestly, even before COVID, we would see the negotiating team once in a while try to have some meaningful, I would say, negotiations through digital means, right? Through teleconferences and whatnot, and to, you know, because for some delegations, it's not always easy to travel abroad and so on, and to speed things up. So we would see that happen. I wouldn't say often. It really depended on the partners, right? But I think now we see more of it because, of course, negotiations have been happening. Initially, it was probably a lot more difficult because it's true for us in Canada, but I'm sure in other countries, some people in the foreign ministry and then the finance ministry, depending where they are, have been very busy with other issues related to COVID, right? So, but things are resuming. Our negotiating friends in global affairs are busy, and I think that's it. The digital will be, you know, the way to do business. And all the international, like WTO, OECD, APEC, G20, all those big, you know, important meetings are still happening in different formats, yes, but it's all going digital. It's not perfect, right? But it's certainly a good second best. And the way it's not perfect, of course, yeah, there's technological challenges. Sometimes you're right, the mic doesn't work or the internet goes off or whatever you. But most importantly, I think what's not there is what we call the hallway discussions, right? The hallway meetings or the little negotiations on the side of a meeting, right? And the meeting the other people. Because when there's a crisis, and everybody is the same. Who do you call? You call the people you know, right? So it's a bit harder to, you know, make new contact. It's not impossible, but it's a bit harder during, you know, a crisis. So if you have established those contacts beforehand, it's a lot easier for people to understand when everybody's running around and you see an email popping through, you say, oh, I know this person, I need to pick this one up, right? So I think this is what is being left out by the digital kind of negotiations or digital international meetings, right? It's the hallway discussions, the meeting the people in person to create the ties, right? So that's all we can do right now. Everything is going digital, but it's not going to stop us. I really don't think so. And hopefully it's for the better because it doesn't replace a face-to-face negotiations, but it can help to speed things up in between, let's say, normal negotiation round, I think. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Frances. Well, just another thing I would like also to greet. I think there are officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Honduras.
And if there are other officials of other ministries, well, most welcome to this seminar. Finally, I would like to say that that keeping markets open and predictable in these critical times, as well as fostering a favorable business environment, will be critical to spur the renewed trade and investments we will need for our social and economic development. And if countries work together, we will see a much faster recovery than if each country acts alone. With these last reflections, I'm very glad to pass the word to Her Excellency Inés Martínez Barinotti, Ambassador of Paraguay to Canada, for the last and the closing remarks. You have the floor, Inés.
Very briefly, thank you very much, Ambassador Stacy. I allow myself to highlight your impeccable conduct of this session. Our thanks to Ambassador Ángel Villalobos, Mrs. Marie-France Paquet, Mr. Corey McPhee, and Mr. Landeiro for their excellent presentations on the one hand, have illustrated us on the factors that now impeding or limit export activities. We know that international trade environment is complex. Trade operations can involve a range of different types of business stakeholders. Therefore, the relevance of this subject, especially when the world is facing a sharp decline of the normal economic activities. We also listened with high interest about a successful and global company such as Vale Canada, with an important track record in this country and worldwide, and the way it's facing the COVID-19 crisis. Well, after listening our distinguished speakers, we can affirm that economic activities and trade in particular is facing an unprecedented situation, hurting greatly our region. We heard about the importance of our region becoming an active player in the coming debates. This is the framework in which take place the reconstruction of the relation of our region and Canada, since Canada is a main actor in the trade and in trade and cooperation. Well, undoubtedly, this virtual conversation series organized by the embassies of Latin America in Canada have been timely at a moment that requires the best efforts and resilience to overcome the economic impact affecting our countries. I would also like, on behalf of the embassies, to thank Ambassadors Juan José Gómez Camacho and Arturo Hernández of Mexico and our Dean Sofía Cerrato for the effort to carry out these conferences, which I repeat, most interesting and which will be for sure most useful for our respective works. And thank you very much to each head of the diplomatic missions for their interest, and to all those who have accompanied these sessions. Bye, thank you.